I'm Emily Germain, and I am a psychology professor. My background is in counseling, and I've always just had an interest in how people work, what makes people work, the way that we think and the way that we behave. Learning and trying to be our best brings us closer to God. I think that learning is really a key part of anybody's walk as a Christian and getting closer to God. I think that God has equipped us with a variety of talents and skills, and He's given all of us the ability to think deeply, to think critically, and to not use that is to waste a gift that I believe God has given us. One of my favorite C.S. Lewis quotes is that God is no fonder of intellectual slackers than of any other kind of slacker. And I think that sometimes we forget that learning and actively engaging our minds as a part of our spiritual growth and as a part of our relationship with God is just as important as some of the other things that we attend to in terms of our heart or our body. That God wants us to learn. He wants us to think critically and to desire to know Him better. It's important that we work to grow our minds because how can we love something if we don't know more about it? I think that this is true in the way that we relate to other people. When you meet somebody new, the first thing you want to do is to get to know them, to learn what they're interested in, what makes them tick. It's the same way when you study a major in school or you find a new hobby. The first thing you want to do is just immerse yourself in that and really expand your mind and expand your knowledge. And the way that we view our relationship with God really should be no different. It's really hard to fully love God and understand who He is to us if we don't know Him. And so the act of growing our minds is just as relevant with our relationship with God as it is any other relationship. For me, this means I love to read about God, to read great theologians, sort of people that have lived in the last 200 years that really have been pillars of the faith. People like C.S. Lewis or A.W. Tozer, who have the ability to talk about theology and things that really do force me to think, but in a way that shows application. And I've found that in doing that, my mind grows, my knowledge of who God is grows, but then also my capacity to love God grows. And so I think that it's so important that we really do work to grow our minds. In addition to that, I think it helps us to explore ideas that maybe we hadn't really considered before. Oftentimes, I think we have these really narrow-minded perspectives on the way that the world works. We see people in really limited capacities. When we learn more, when we read more, we're exposed to thinking and ideas that they're just different. And that helps us not only change our views sometimes, but just love people better, empathize with people better, makes us more compassionate. Negative thinking affects the way that we live in some pretty significant ways. What we know about the way that the brain works, there's a kind of famous phrase in neuroscience: neurons that fire together, wire together. And all this simply means is that repeated patterns become easier to repeat down the road. And so the great thing about this is that good things in our life, good habits, good patterns of thinking have really positive impacts on our life. The downside to this is repeated negative thinking, repeated negative patterns sometimes can become ingrained or entrenched in the way that we live. And so if we have patterns of negativity in our lives, if we have negative thought patterns and negative ways of interacting with people, over time, that kind of becomes our default setting. And it makes it really hard for us to see things in a positive light, to even begin to understand concepts like grace and love and joy, because we've kind of gotten into this rut of negative thinking. And so it's really important that we not get in these ruts of negativity, but instead we're able to focus on developing positive patterns so that it's almost an automatic response, that our default response in any given situation is positivity over negativity.